Hello everyone, and welcome to this next Ask a Geographer session with me, Professor John Anderson from the School of Geography and Planning in Cardiff University. And in some of the other pods we've looked at issues of regeneration, and in this case we're going to look at one in particular, a particular case of regeneration, the case study of Tramshed in Cardiff. Now, we've seen in many of the other pods the importance of the role of place, and that's part and parcel of the A-level curricula, thinking about the role of place, how places can change in relation to local or global policies, processes, how policies can intervene in places to make places fairer, to make places more equitable, to try and regenerate places in terms of economic, social or environmental criteria. And all these interventions and processes in relation to place can change the very material form of that place, change its locale, for example, but also change the way that place feels to be in. The sorts of facilities can influence the sense of belonging, the sense of attachment, the sense of definition that people have of themselves in place. It can change the place's identity, but it can also change a community's identity in relation to that place. So we can see that place can be important for people. Its location, its locale, its sense of place is important for particular communities. And when we think about those communities, we might be referring to a group of people who share a common culture, a common value system, a common set of interests based on their social and spatial identity, based on their identity perhaps, and their territory too. So local communities are influenced directly by how places change. They are directly influenced by regeneration projects. And we're going to look at that in relation to a particular example in Tramshed, in an area of Cardiff called Grangetown. And this particular example is a really good example of the way in which regeneration has influenced the connection that people have to their local place. It's changed the built fabric of that place, and it's encouraged some communities to come to that area of the city, but it's perhaps displaced other people in that community. So in many cases, it's a good example of the way in which economic, social, environmental aspects of regeneration are sometimes in opposition. And which criterion we think is most important is our own value judgment. So what do you think? What do you think about this Tramshed case, and whether this is a good example of regeneration or not? So this is an example of the Tramshed regeneration project in inner city Cardiff. If we see on the map on the right hand side, you can see where the central station is, you can see where the Millennium Stadium is, and just the other side of the River Taff is an area called Riverside, to the north of the railway tracks, and Grangetown to the south of the railway tracks. And just where that black circle is was an increasingly derelict area of the city where an old tram hub called Tramshed was. And Cardiff Council in 2014 decided that they wanted to do a regeneration project here, to stop it being a derelict site, this brownfield site that was going to rack and ruin, and develop it, regenerate it, and regenerate that area of the inner city. Cardiff City Council chose to convert this derelict tram depot into an events venue, a studio space and residential flats. This multi-purpose use place, so people can go there to watch the cinemas, to have a community space, to have a bar, have a restaurant there, for people to work there, have studios, to kind of small scale entrepreneurial ventures there, as well as people who live there. And it was particularly meant to encourage the creative class to come into Cardiff. You may or may not know that Cardiff has a kind of is the national centre for the BBC in Wales, and there's huge development in the creative economy, from people doing websites to people doing arts and culture to people working in the media, and the BBC is one example of that. But that was particularly based in the city centre and also in Cardiff Bay, and what they wanted to do was get a new hub in this twilight zone, this inner city area, this brownfield site just outside the city centre, just the other side from Central Station, and encourage this creative community to come into Grangetown through this Tramshed regeneration. So it raises the question, if you like, who would this regeneration project be successful, and if so, who for? The First Minister, Carwyn Jones, wanted this building to be back in operation. He said this is an iconic building and we want to put it back into action, not just for Cardiff but for Wales as a whole. This might suggest, therefore, that the community it seeks to benefit might be that broader creative community that benefit Wales as a whole. It may or may not benefit local people, but the vision, nevertheless, was to develop a building where the creative community can develop and thrive whilst also interacting with the local community in a positive and inclusive way, at least acknowledging that they were at least two different communities here with potentially compatible demands. But would that happen in practice? Would this multi-event venue with its kind of commercial hub and its studio flats benefit the local community? So the intention, as the architect suggested, was to develop a vibrant new small businesses offering cultural facilities and local set-up businesses in the community, and be an integral part of the renewal of this area of Cardiff, and perhaps generate more redevelopment to the south. Or as Alt Cardiff, a local media outlet, suggests, Tramshed has been transformed into a money-making machine. You redevelop one area and it creates a stimulus for activity. New people are drawn in, people with money, and everybody benefits. And newcomers to the area were brought into that area. A whole set of new businesses were brought into the Tramshed. A whole lot of people who would never come into that area of the city, who would spend their money in the city centre or in Cardiff Bay, were now spending it in Grangetown. As a newcomer to the area said, I find that as a consequence of the Tramshed development, I visit the city centre less now. Hopefully other people will do the same, and we will use local businesses too. This idea that a stimulation had a kind of trickle-down effect, that the investment in one area overflows and benefits everybody around. And as someone working in the planning industry suggests, that's what this Tramshed sought to do. That was its clear market, to generate new stimulus in the area and to make money. But it might not necessarily provide services for the existing community. It might simply provide those services for this new community, this new creative community in the area. The local residents perhaps engaged with the Tramshed redevelopment in less positive ways. As one local resident suggested, I'm all for regeneration, but I didn't want it here. Why? Well, this wasn't for me. There's lots of noise generated late at night from the venue. People coming and going at all hours. Parking was always a problem, and now it's worse. People are coming from outside the community to their local community, spending the money within that venue, but not necessarily spending their money in other areas. But even if it did benefit the local businesses, the other people who live around it just have to deal with the negative consequences of this regeneration project. Some local residents even say that, well, they've never even been there. I've never been inside the Tramshed, one person says. I don't know anything about it really. It's just that red building across the road that looks a little bit better now, but it's not for the likes of me. And it also happened that the local residents couldn't afford the studio flats that were generated there. It was supposed to be that they were going to be entry-level flats at about £140,000. But when they opened in about 2018, the lowest level price was £180,000, which was simply beyond the capacity of most local residents to afford for simply a 1 or a 2 bedroom flat. It suggested, therefore, that this project wasn't there to benefit the local residents. It was there to benefit a different community, to forward the creative class, and it didn't really matter that the local communities were kind of left out of this project. So, in summary, therefore, we could question whether this was a regeneration project at all, or was it perhaps a gentrification project? Gentrification, as I'm sure you know, is, as Matthews tells us, the replacement of traditional inner city, working class residential areas with improved housing, more affluent inhabitants and more upmarket services. Tramshed was not sold to the local community as a gentrification project. It was sold to them as a regeneration project. But in practice, it's benefited the more middle-class incomer than it has the local resident. We can ask ourselves questions, therefore, about what effect do projects like this have on a local community's sense of place. What does it suggest? Do you think local communities have a stronger sense of attachment as a consequence of this, or do they feel slightly displaced by it? Does it create community cohesion between incomers and pre-existing locals, or tension between those particular different groups? On what criteria could you judge its success? You might suggest that actually the regeneration and the reuse of a brownfield site that was effectively going to rack and ruin, and the influx of a new community in the area might create a vibrancy, might create a sense of the city as a whole as a new area for the creative class, for media types, and that is generally a good thing for the city. If people beyond the city think things are happening in Cardiff, cool things are happening in Cardiff, things that we like, then that might generate more stimulation, and actually the price that's borne by the local community is a price worth paying for regeneration on a broader scale. It's these complexities that regeneration suggests to us, and we as kind of critical geographers need to engage with these processes to understand them, to think whether they're good things or not.